The courtroom went dead silent. The moment Sylvia Beaumont spread 87 pages across the defense table. Not because of the papers, because of her hands. Steady. Absolutely steady. The hands of a woman who had been through worse than this and walked out the other side, carrying something heavier than a lawsuit. The judge cleared his throat. The plaintiff's attorney, a man named Curtis Vane, 34 years old, $200 haircut, the kind of confidence that comes from never once being wrong in public, leaned back in his chair and smiled at his colleague the way people smile when they already know how something ends. He had no idea. 3 weeks earlier, Sylvia Beaumont walked into the lobby of Vane Capital Partners on a Wednesday morning, carrying a canvas tote bag with a broken strap. She was 67 years old, gray hair cropped close to her head, a slight tremor in her left hand from a medication she'd been on for 2 years. She wore bifocals on a chain around her neck and sensible shoes with thick rubber soles, the kind that squeak on marble floors. The marble floors at Vane Capital Partners squeaked when she walked across them. The receptionist at the front desk, a young woman named Priya, looked up, looked back down, and said without fully making eye contact, "Deliveries go around the side entrance." Sylvia set her tote bag on the counter. "I have a 9 o'clock with Marcus Vane." Priya looked up again, slower this time. "Your name?" "Sylvia Beaumont." A pause. The kind that means someone is deciding how much effort this is worth. Priya typed something, read something, and typed something again. Then she picked up the phone and said quietly, like she didn't want Sylvia to hear, "There's a woman in the lobby. Says she has a 9 o'clock with Marcus." Another pause. "I don't know. She looks like somebody's grandmother." She wasn't wrong about that. Sylvia Beaumont was somebody's grandmother. Specifically, she was the grandmother of a 22-year-old named Calvin, who that morning was sitting in a holding cell at the Mecklenburg County Detention Center because his court-appointed attorney had missed 3 filing deadlines, failed to subpoena a single witness, and shown up to his last hearing 20 minutes late, carrying a gas station coffee and smelling like last night's dinner. Calvin had been charged with fraud, a crime he did not commit, the kind of charge that attaches itself to a young black man in a city where certain zip codes are treated like probable cause. Sylvia had come to Vane Capital Partners because Vane Capital Partners was the entity whose name appeared on the financial documents that prosecutors were using as their primary evidence. And Sylvia Beaumont, 67 years old, tremor in her left hand, squeaky shoes on marble floors, was going to get those documents corrected. Because she had read every single one of them, twice, and she knew exactly where the error was. What Priya didn't know, what Marcus Vane didn't know, what the receptionist and the security guard and the 3 associates who would eventually join the meeting didn't know, was what Sylvia Beaumont had done before she became somebody's grandmother. Nobody knew. She had made sure of that. Sylvia had grown up in Greensboro, North Carolina, the 3rd daughter of a school teacher and a man who fixed things. Not just appliances, things, problems, contracts, disputes between neighbors. Her father had a gift for seeing where something had gone wrong and working backward to the origin point. He called it finding the fault line. At 14, Sylvia read her first financial prospectus. Not because she had to, because she found it on her father's desk and couldn't put it down. At 19, she left for Howard University on a full academic scholarship. At 23, she graduated first in her class from Georgetown Law. At 27, she joined the Securities and Exchange Commission as an investigative attorney. At 32, she published a paper on structural fraud in pension fund management that was cited in federal court 4 times in the following decade. At 38, she was named to a federal task force on financial crimes that operated at a level so quiet, so deliberately invisible, that her name appeared in no press releases and no public records. They called it the Gray Unit. 12 people, 1 mandate, find what other investigators couldn't. Sylvia's specialty was document analysis. Specifically, she could read a financial filing the way a surgeon reads an X-ray. Not just what was there, but what was missing. What had been moved. what had been layered under something that looked legitimate but wasn't. She retired in 2009. Her husband, Theodore, had been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's that spring. She gave up the office, gave up the clearance, gave up the case that had been consuming her for 3 years, and came home to take care of the man who had waited for her through every late night and missed anniversary and canceled vacation for 17 years. Theodore died in 2016. Sylvia moved into a smaller house, helped raise Calvin when her daughter Renata's marriage fell apart, and spent her mornings at the kitchen table with a crossword puzzle and a cup of coffee that was always slightly too hot. If you saw her at the grocery store, you would hold the door. You would not, under any circumstances, think, federal investigator. You would think, sweet old lady, hope she finds a good parking spot. That was fine with Sylvia. She had spent 30 years being underestimated. She had learned to use it like a tool. The 9 o'clock meeting lasted 4 minutes. Marcus Vane was 38 years old, his father's son, built like a man who had rowed crew in college, and still thought about it. He came into the conference room with his jacket on and didn't take it off, which Sylvia recognized as the body language of someone who planned to leave quickly. Mrs. Beaumont. He did not offer his hand. I've been told you're here regarding a family member, Calvin Beaumont. He's been charged with wire fraud. The prosecution's primary exhibit is a series of transaction records from an account managed through your firm. Marcus nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're waiting for you to finish so they can speak. And you're his attorney? I'm his grandmother. A pause. Marcus looked at the associate beside him, a young woman named Andrea, who had been writing notes and stopped. Mrs. Beaumont, I have a great deal of respect for family members who want to support their loved ones. But the legal proceedings around this case are matters for attorneys and the transaction records your firm submitted to the district attorney's office show a wire transfer of $340,000 from Calvin's LLC on March 14th. Sylvia opened her tote bag and set 3 pages on the table. These are the same records, but look at the timestamp protocol on page 2. The transaction ID series resets mid-sequence. That doesn't happen in a legitimate wire transfer. It happens when 2 separate transaction logs have been merged into one document. Calvin's transfer was $34,000. Someone added a 0. The room was quiet. Andrea stopped pretending to write notes. I'm not accusing your firm of fraud, Sylvia said calmly. I'm telling you there is a document error that is currently sending an innocent young man toward a federal conviction, and I'm asking you to look at it. Marcus Vane looked at the papers. Then he looked at Sylvia. Then he said something that would cost him more than he knew. Ma'am, I don't know where you got these, or what you think you're seeing, but transaction records from this firm are processed by a compliance team with 22 years of case law. Establishes that a timestamp sequence break in a merged financial document is inadmissible without authentication by the originating institution. I wrote 2 of those briefs. Sylvia picked up her papers and put them back in her tote bag. I'll give you until Friday. She stood up. Marcus stood up faster. I'll tell you what I'll give you, he said, and his voice had changed. Not louder, colder. The voice of a man who does not like being corrected in his own conference room by a woman who arrived with a broken strap on her bag. I'll give you nothing. Because you have nothing. You walked in here with photocopies and a theory, and you think that's leverage. It isn't. He leaned forward, both hands on the table. Your grandson made choices, and now he's sitting where people who make those choices sit. That has nothing to do with my firm's documents, and everything to do with who he is and where he comes from. He let that sit. He wanted her to feel it. Sylvia Beaumont looked at him for a long moment. The tremor in her left hand was still. Her bifocals caught the light from the window behind him. You'll want to write down what you just said, she told him, because you're going to be asked to repeat it. She picked up her tote bag and walked out. The marble floors squeaked all the way to the elevator. Marcus Vane laughed. Andrea did not. What happened next moved fast. Sylvia went home, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened her laptop. She spent 4 hours building a timeline. Not from memory. She had boxes. 30 years of boxes in a storage unit on the east side of town, labeled with Theodore's handwriting, because he had believed always that you kept everything. You never knew when you'd need it. She knew what she was looking for. She had seen the pattern before, in 2004, during an investigation that had never become public, in a city that was not Charlotte. A financial management firm, mid-sized, respectable enough that no one looked too closely, a pattern of small account errors, each one individually explainable, collectively impossible, and a paper trail that only looked clean if you didn't know where to look. She started making calls. The first was to a man named Terrence Webb, who had retired from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in 2018 and now grew tomatoes in Asheville, and occasionally answered his phone. "Sylvia," he said when he heard her voice in the tone of a man who knows a call like this means his weekend is gone. "Tell me what you found," she told him. He was quiet for a long time. "Send me the pages," he said. The second call was to her daughter Renata, who was working a double shift at the hospital and picked up anyway, the way mothers do. "Mama, how bad is it?" "It's bad," Sylvia said. "But I think I found it." "Found what?" "The fault line." Renata was quiet. She had grown up watching her mother find fault lines. She knew what came next. "Calvin doesn't know you're doing this, does he?" "Calvin thinks I'm at home watching my programs, Mama. He would worry. He's in jail, Mama." "He's already worrying. Then let him worry about something other than me." On Thursday morning, Sylvia received a certified letter from the law offices of Holloway, Vane and Associates. She read it at the kitchen table with her coffee, which was slightly too hot, the way it always was. The letter informed her that Marcus Vane was filing a lawsuit against her for defamation, tortious interference with business, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He was seeking $400,000 in damages. The letter described her as, and these are the words they chose, a delusional elderly woman with no legal standing, no factual basis for her claims, and a pattern of harassing behavior toward a legitimate business. It noted that her so-called analysis of his firm's documents had been shared with a paralegal from Calvin's public defender's office, which Sylvia had done intentionally, and that this sharing constituted interference. It concluded by suggesting that given her age and the apparent cognitive decline evidenced by her behavior, her family may wish to consider appropriate next steps. Appropriate next steps. Sylvia set the letter down. She picked up her coffee. She looked out the kitchen window at the yard. Theodore had planted the summer before his diagnosis, the roses that still came back every year like they had somewhere to be. Then she picked up her phone and called a woman named Louise Adeyemi. Louise Adeyemi had been 2 years behind Sylvia at Georgetown. She had spent 30 years as a federal prosecutor before opening a practice in Charlotte. She was 64 years old, 5 feet 11 inches, and had a voice that courtrooms remembered. "I heard," Louise said before Sylvia finished explaining. "Terrence called me this morning. I've been waiting for you to call. He wants $400,000. He's going to want a lot more than money by the time this is over. Can you be in my office at 2? "I can. Bring the boxes, Sylvia." I was going to. The discovery process was not what Marcus Vane expected. He had expected Sylvia to settle. That was the math. An elderly woman on a fixed income, no legal standing, a grandson in detention, up against a firm with 3 attorneys on retainer and a reputation that had survived worse. The lawsuit was designed to do one thing, make her go away. Instead, Louise Adeyemi filed a counter-motion requesting the complete original transaction logs from Vane Capital Partners, not the merged documents, the originals, every timestamp, every processing record, the raw data. Vane's attorneys objected on grounds of proprietary business information. The judge, a compact, gray-haired woman named Honorable Sandra Fitch, who had presided over financial cases for 19 years and had approximately no patience for incomplete disclosure, noted the objection and scheduled a hearing for the following Tuesday. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Terrence Webb, retired, growing tomatoes in Asheville, had made 3 phone calls of his own. to former colleagues, to people who, like him, had spent careers looking at numbers that didn't add up. People who, also like him, still picked up the phone when someone called with the right kind of question. By Friday afternoon, 2 former SEC investigators and 1 retired federal judge had reviewed Sylvia's timeline and submitted written statements confirming her methodology. Not her conclusions, the methodology. That was enough. And on Saturday morning, Sylvia received a text message from a number she didn't recognize. It said, "Only check your email. Theodore would be proud." She didn't know who sent it. She had some ideas. She didn't ask. What was in the email was a file. Internal communications from Vane Capital Partners, dated over a 14-month period. Compliance flags that had been reviewed and closed without action. A memo from a mid-level analyst, a young man who had since left the firm, noting the timestamp irregularities in 3 separate client accounts and asking for clarification. The memo had been marked resolved. It had not been resolved. The courtroom on Tuesday was not dramatic in the way courtrooms are in movies. It was fluorescent and beige, and smelled faintly of coffee from the break room down the hall. Marcus Vane arrived with 2 attorneys and a media consultant, who sat in the gallery with a phone in each hand. He wore a dark suit that cost more than Sylvia's monthly grocery budget. Sylvia arrived with Louise in a cardboard box. She wore the blazer she had bought for Theodore's memorial service, navy blue. She had not worn it since. It still fit. Marcus's lead attorney opened with a presentation about Sylvia's lack of legal standing, her history of irregular communications with the firm, and the damage her allegations had caused to their client's professional reputation. He used the word frail twice and confused once, and both times he said these words. Sylvia watched the judge. Judge Fitch wrote something down. Louise stood up. She buttoned one button on her jacket, the way she always did before she spoke. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibits A through P. These are the original transaction logs from Vane Capital Partners' compliance server, obtained through your court order from last week." Vane's attorney objected. Judge Fitch overruled. Exhibit A is the merged document submitted to the district attorney's office as evidence in the criminal case against Calvin Beaumont. Louise clicked to the first image on the courtroom screen. Exhibit B is the original transaction log from which it was generated. Your Honor, a document examiner certified by the Federal Bureau of Investigation has confirmed what Mrs. Beaumont identified 3 weeks ago in a conference room with a broken strap on her tote bag. She let that sit for 1 beat. The transaction ID sequence in the merged document is not consistent with a single legitimate wire transfer. The $340,000 figure was created by merging 2 separate records. Calvin Beaumont transferred $34,000. He did not transfer $340,000. He committed no crime. The gallery stirred. Marcus Vane's media consultant put one of his phones face down on the bench. Louise then called her first witness. The young man who took the stand was 29 years old. His name was Philip Garrett, and he had worked in Vane Capital's compliance department for 18 months. Before resigning in February of the previous year, he sat down, swore to tell the truth, and folded his hands in his lap. "Mr. Garrett," Louise said, "did you file an internal report noting timestamp irregularities in client account documents?" "I did." "What happened to that report?" Philip looked at Marcus Vane. Marcus was looking at the table. "I was told the irregularities had been reviewed and there was nothing to act on." "By whom?" "By Marcus Vane." "And did you believe that?" A pause. "No," Philip said. "That's why I left." The gallery stirred again, louder this time. Louise let the testimony breathe. Then she turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I have one additional matter. The internal communications I referenced, including the compliance memo Mr. Garrett authored, were not disclosed during discovery, despite being directly responsive to our document requests. I am asking the court to note this and to refer the matter to the appropriate authorities." Judge Fitch removed her glasses. "Mr. Holloway," she said to Vane's lead attorney, who was now the color of old chalk, "the plaintiff's claims are dismissed. Given the evidence before this court, I am referring the matter of document manipulation to the United States Attorney's Office and to the North Carolina State Bar for review of your conduct in these proceedings. She put her glasses back on. The criminal case against Calvin Beaumont will be referred to the District Attorney's Office with a formal request for review and dismissal. She picked up her gavel, and I wanted on the record that Mrs. Beaumont identified this irregularity before anyone with a law license or a federal appointment did. She looked at Sylvia directly. Not the way judges usually look at defendants, the way one professional looks at another. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down. Marcus Vane sat in his chair. He did not stand. He did not speak. He looked at the screen, still showing the side-by-side comparison of the two documents, and for the first time since Sylvia Beaumont had walked into his conference room, with a broken strap and squeaky shoes, he had nothing left to perform. Sylvia stood up. She looked at him once. "I told you to write down what you said," she told him quietly. "About where he comes from." Then she picked up her tote bag, took Louise's arm, and walked out. Renata and Calvin were waiting in the hallway. Calvin had been released on bond 2 days earlier, after Judge Fitch had issued a preliminary ruling, raising serious questions about the prosecution's evidence. He was 22 years old and stood 6 feet tall, and had his grandfather Theodore's eyes, dark and still and patient. He didn't say anything when he saw his grandmother come through the door. He just put his arms around her and held on the way people hold on when they have been somewhere frightening and have come back to find that someone was fighting for them the entire time they were gone. Renata pressed her hand over her mouth. Louise Adeyemi stood to the side, giving them a moment, the way good lawyers do. Outside the courthouse, a reporter with a camera stepped forward. She was young and moved quickly. "Mrs. Beaumont, the case has been dismissed. The criminal charges against your grandson are expected to be dropped. Vane Capital is under federal review. What do you want people to know?" Sylvia looked at the camera. Then she looked at Calvin behind her, then back at the lens. "I want people to know that a document doesn't lie," she said. "Even when the people who made it want it to, the numbers are always there. You just have to know where to look." The reporter paused. "Then, there are a lot of people asking about your background, your history at the SEC. The Gray Unit. Will you talk about that publicly?" Sylvia Beaumont looked at her grandson, 22 years old, standing straight, the concrete gone from his face, replaced by something that looked, finally, like the boy she had raised. She looked at Renata, who had driven 4 hours to be here and would drive 4 hours back tonight and be on shift at 6 a.m. She looked at Louise, standing on the courthouse steps, holding her briefcase with one hand and wiping her eye with the back of the other and pretending she wasn't. "No," Sylvia said. "That part of the story belongs to the people I worked with. My part is Calvin." She put her hand on her grandson's arm, and they walked down the courthouse steps together, unhurried, and in the afternoon light they looked exactly like what they were. A grandmother and the boy she raised, and nothing, from a distance, would have told you anything else. That was fine with Sylvia. That had always been fine with Sylvia. The fallout for Marcus Vane took 60 days and was thorough. The U.S. Attorney's Office opened a formal investigation into Vane Capital Partners within a week of the court referral. 14 client accounts were flagged for review. Philip Garrett's testimony was entered into the federal record. Curtis Holloway surrendered his law license, pending bar proceedings. 2 additional former clients came forward with accounts of document irregularities they had raised internally, and been told did not exist. Marcus Vane's firm dissolved before the investigation concluded. The office on the 18th floor, with its marble lobby and its receptionist, who directed old women to the side entrance, was empty by Thanksgiving. The criminal case against Calvin Beaumont was formally dismissed on a Wednesday afternoon. Sylvia was at the kitchen table when Renata called to tell her. She said, "Thank you, and call me when you're off shift." And then she sat for a while with her coffee, which was slightly too hot, and looked out at Theodore's roses. Calvin went back to finish his accounting degree the following semester. He visited every Sunday. He brought groceries and stayed for dinner and sat across from his grandmother, asking questions she had never been asked before. About the SEC, about the cases, about what it felt like to read a document and know, the way you just know, that something is wrong. She answered all of them. 3 months after the courthouse, Sylvia received a letter from the Financial Crimes Division of a law school in Charlotte. They were launching a program on forensic document analysis for law students and community paralegals. They asked if she would be willing to teach a seminar. She thought about it for 2 days. Then she called Louise. "They want me to teach." "I know," Louise said. "I suggested you. You might have asked. You might have said no." A pause. "I would have said yes eventually. I know that too." The first seminar was on a Saturday morning in January. 17 people. Law students, 2 public defenders, a paralegal who worked at a legal aid clinic, and a retired postal worker who had started her own housing dispute advocacy group and wanted to understand financial filings. Sylvia didn't give a lecture. She put a document on the projector, a real one, anonymized, from a case that was now closed. "Tell me what's wrong with this," she said. Silence. Then, from the back of the room, the postal worker said, "The column totals don't match the line items." Sylvia looked at her. "That's right," she said. "What does that tell you? That someone wants you to look at the total and not the lines?" "Yes." Sylvia nodded, and something in her settled the way it settles when a thing you carried for a long time finds the right place to land. "Now, let's go through it line by line." I think about Sylvia Beaumont when people tell me that experience expires. When they talk about getting older like it means getting smaller. When they look at someone with gray hair and a tremor in their hand and think, not a threat, not a factor, not someone who could walk into a room and quietly, calmly, completely dismantle everything you built on a lie. She never stopped being who she was. She just stopped performing it. There is a difference, a very important one. If this story stayed with you, if you thought of someone, a grandmother, a father, a neighbor, with quiet hands and a life you don't fully know, drop their name in the comments. Tell me about them. I read everyone. And if someone in your life needs to hear that standing up for the people you love is always worth it, even when it costs you, even when the whole system turns its face away, share this with them today. Because Calvin Beaumont is finishing his degree on a Tuesday morning, and somewhere in Charlotte, a 71-year-old paralegal is learning to read a financial document like a map. And the fault line, once you learn to see it, never disappears. Neither does the person who taught you how to look.